So we have our app, we have some random color functions that we can shove in there, but what if we've got some text in here and I hit transport and it's put in this box? What if that text is too small for our user to read? Well, on iOS they can set this in system settings, the default text size, and you'd do well to actually look into that. But we can also give them a helping hand by allowing them to change the size of this text. And how are we going to do that? We're going to make what's called a slider. A slider is a control that you can slide from 0 to 1, and then you can use the associated values to change something. So let's head on over to Xamarin, open up our main storyboard. Inside of the toolbox, let's search for slider and let's drag one in. And what I'm going to do with this slider is first of all give it a name. Let's call this text size slider. Then I'm going to position it on top of my text at the bottom here. So I'm going to drag my pins down. I'm also going to give this a width. Let me just zoom in a little. Let's drag it out. And what we can do is have this slider pinned to the sides of our screen. So let's make these values something like 100, because we don't want it to take quite the whole screen. Okay, that should be sorted now, so we have a full slider. Now if I select the slider and I scroll down in the properties box, we can set values for the minimum, maximum and the default when it is first loaded. So these values are completely up to you. Obviously we can turn them up or turn them down. It depends on what you need. So what do we need? Well, we're going to use this slider to change the text size of this text box. And if I scroll down here, you'll notice we have a font size of 14 points as it's currently set. So what I would like to do with the slider is change these values to a current of 14, and let's have a minimum of 5 and perhaps a maximum of 22. So these values are going to correspond to the text font size we're going to apply to this box when we slide the slider. Just of note, we have some images that we can use for minimum and maximum. We can have some track tints when we're minimum and max. So for example, if we're max, a typical track tint would be red, and the minimum, maybe we would make that green. And you can also have a tint for the thumb, which is the little circle that we see there, so I'll make that brown. Okay, save that storyboard, head over to your view controller, and we should now have a reference to that slider. Okay, so how do we get the values out of a slider? Well, first we have to have an event. So inside of our view did load, we need to reference our text size slider dot, and we need to find the event that corresponds to what we need. So I'm betting it's something like value changed. Let's have a plus equals, and let's make a method stub for it, text slider value changed. So inside of here, we want to actually grab the value of our text size slider. So let's have var value is equal to text size slider dot value. And you'll notice this returns a float. That may be important later on, or it may not. It depends what we're doing with the value. Now we need to assign that value to the font size of that text view. So text view dot font is equal to UI font dot. Now we could actually set our own font here from name, and this asks for a font name, so we could have something like Helvetica if we wished. But this is a bad design pattern, so I'm just warning you against it now. If you hard code these values in, later on in other iOS systems, Helvetica might not be there, or you might want to use the system font. So it's a much better way to use the UI font dot system font of size. And what this does is grab the default system font for the current version of iOS this is running on, and then apply a size to it only. So inside of the arguments we want to pass over our value, and we are ready to go. So let's hit play, and when this runs, we grab our slider. Every time we move that slider, the value changes, and it reports back to the text view and changes the font size. And there we have our lovely scaling font before our eyes. Now, one other thing about the text view that I'd never mentioned before is that by default it allows scrolling. So you can make this as big as you like and then allow your user to scroll through it. Okay, that sums up how to use a slider. Typically, if you're making a media app, you would use the slider to adjust volume, brightness, something like that. You could also use a slider to mark progress in something, but there's a better element for that, and that is to use a progress bar, which we're going to cover in the next lecture.